Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Smith, you have a long tenure at the Department of Justice. Would you agree with the statement that DOJ charging policies require prosecutors to bring charges only where the admissible evidence is expected to be sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction? Is that right?
Welcome back, truth seekers and reality check enthusiasts. Today, we're diving into a clip that showcases some classic political theater as a House member attempts to poke holes in the charges against a certain former president. Get ready, because we're about to dissect some arguments that are more full of holes than Swiss cheese.
That is correct. That's from the Federal Principles of Prosecution.
And in this case you brought against President Trump, one of the charges you pursued was under Title 18, Section 371, which requires an agreement to interfere with the lawful function of the United States through deceit or dishonesty that the defendant knowingly and intentionally joined, and an overt act. And what I'd like to ask you about is this. So you would agree that Section 371 requires dishonesty or deceit and also proof that a criminal defendant acted knowingly and intentionally. Is that right?
I believe that's correct. It requires knowing deceit targeted a lawful government function.
So you would then also agree, would you not, that opinion, disagreement, or even mistake is insufficient to satisfy the burden of criminal intent set forth in that statute?
We needed to prove and intended to prove at trial that the false statements that Donald Trump made were knowingly false.
That they were false and that it was done knowingly.
And there it is, the prosecution's burden, proving knowingly false statements. This isn't about someone accidentally misremembering where they left their keys. This is about a deliberate, conscious effort to spread falsehoods to subvert an election. The defense's whole strategy relies on painting Trump as either too dumb to know better or just getting bad advice. But you don't accidentally try to overturn an election. That takes intention, folks, and a whole lot of knowing exactly what you're doing.
So even under your theory of the case, even if we took your facts as true, you still would have been required to prove that the president said something false and that he did it knowingly. So going on to your next charge, let's talk about obstruction. There too, that charge requires proof of wrongful intent, does it not?
That's correct.
So if a defendant there actually believes a factual claim is true, that would mean he could not be convicted of that charge. Isn't that right?
The defendant for that charge would have to behave corruptly, and corruptly could include seeking an unlawful benefit, seeking a benefit to benefit themselves, in this case, to stay in office when they had, in fact, not won the election.
But there, too, there's a requirement of intent, that this conduct must be knowing and intentional. Isn't that right?
There is an intent requirement, yes.
And didn't you
intent.
also acknowledge in your deposition that the president was receiving information from multiple advisors, Giuliani, Eastman, Clark, Powell, and in your deposition you said he was almost just regurgitating what they told him. Isn't that right?
I don't believe I said he was regurgitating what they told him. I think what I said is that he was making knowingly false claims, that he was believing anything that would keep him in office, and he was rejecting any—
Boom! Jack Smith dropping the mic like a seasoned pro. The idea that Trump was just a passive recipient regurgitating information is a joke. It's like saying a chef is just regurgitating ingredients when they're actively choosing which ones to use and which to throw out based on their desired outcome. Trump wasn't some innocent bystander. He was the conductor of this chaotic orchestra, actively seeking out and amplifying voices that fed his narrative, while silencing anything that threatened his hold on power. That's not regurgitation. That's curation with a sinister motive.
I agree that those people, or some people, were giving the president conflicting advice at that time. Would you not?
You are correct in that his original campaign staff told him he had lost. He fired them and brought in people who would—
But criminal liability, under the statutes you used in your indictment, requires proving intent, not simply the undermining of democratic norms or expressing an opinion with which you do not agree. So is it not correct, sir, that here you charged 2 intent-based crimes without any direct proof whatsoever that the conduct charged was knowing, intentional, or that you were going to have an adequate basis to sustain a conviction at trial?
I felt we had proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I felt that that proof included direct testimony from a number of witnesses to prove the knowing falsity of his claims.
Despite the fact that in your own deposition you acknowledge the existence of conflicting advice. If this defendant were anyone other than Donald J. Trump, Mr. Smith, I find it hard to believe that we would be sitting here today having a hearing about an indictment that was returned knowing that the elements of the offenses could not be demonstrated.
Oh, the classic witch hunt defense. If it weren't for Trump being Trump, none of this would be happening. Well, Representative, if anyone else tried to strong-arm election officials, incite an insurrection, and pressure their VP to violate the Constitution, they'd probably be facing charges too, possibly even more swiftly. The argument isn't that he's being targeted, because he's Donald Trump. It's that he's being held accountable, despite being Donald Trump. The law, ideally, applies to everyone, regardless of their last name or how many gold-plated buildings they own.
Now, let's talk about this. I assume you're also familiar with the Department of Justice policy that prohibits prosecutors from selecting the timing of investigative or prosecutorial actions for the purpose of affecting any election.
Yes, I am. That's the election year sensitivities policy, and we followed it in all respects. The public integrity section, who administers that policy, concurred that we followed it in all respects.
And that's a wrap on today's deep dive. It's clear that some folks are still trying to bend reality to fit their narrative, but the facts, as always, speak for themselves. What did you think of these arguments? Let me know in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more straight talk on California and national politics. Stay sharp, folks.